Welcome to Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Stay friends. We have another exciting guest on our podcast talking about a topic we haven't talked about specifically. We talked about a lot of reform for government, and this is another reform, yet it's not one we've talked about. The individual's name is Melanie, and she's with a movement called Impeach SCOTUS 5. So she's going to talk about that to us today. So welcome to the podcast, Melanie.
Thank you. Great to be here.
We are glad to have you. If you could get started by kindly giving us an introduction to yourself, a brief biographical sketch, whatever you're comfortable sharing with us to give a broad idea of what you're about would be great.
Okay. Well, my name is Melanie. I started the Facebook page Impeach SCOTUS 5 in 2014.
Wow.
And I am in Oregon. I live in Oregon. But I started it while I was actually in North Idaho.
Okay. Wow. Great. So that's good that you've been doing that page for a long time. You've stuck at it, so that's good.
Yeah, it's not super robust, but it's, I was really very happy. I don't know if the right word is happy, but I was really happy to see that there was coverage being done by other media sources about what was going on with the Supreme Court and large gifts towards Clarence Thomas and things like that. But that's actually not how I got started with the page.
Oh, so how did you get started, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, so I think that there might be a number of people who have heard about the McCutcheon decision that was in response with Citizens United decision by the Supreme Court.
Uh-huh.
That's actually how I got started. My very first first in-person protest was in response to the McCutcheon decision.
Oh my. Okay, so
please
briefly summarize that. You said it relates to the Citizens United. Please briefly summarize the McCutcheon decision for us.
Okay, so the McCutcheon decision is really actually about how there's limits. The Supreme Court basically struck down the aggregate limits on the amount a person can contribute to during like a 2-year period to all federal candidates. So it's basically saying like money is speech. Like it's really putting it in there saying this is pay to play. And that not having limits for federal candidates is actually pretty scary because we deal with a lot of corruption that's legalized corruption. And so this Supreme Court ruling doesn't get as much conversation because of Citizens United, but this McCutcheon decision piggybacked on the decision with Citizens United, and so that's kind of why it was really very frustrating to see that our federal government, even on the Supreme Court, was just opening up more and more doors for us to have more money in our politics.
Oh no! So, wow! So that's a good start. So you said that was your first in-person protest because of that.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes, it was.
So, what
I went to Salem.
Oh, Salem, Massachusetts?
No, Salem, Oregon, which is the capital.
Oh, okay. Okay. Wow. So, if you don't mind sharing, what was the organization that called the protest, or was there a number of them?
It was just individuals. There were people on Facebook, social media, saying meet at the Capitol at I think it was like noon or 1 or something like that to protest, and that's what I did. I showed up.
Wow. So that's not something I usually think about, people protesting a Supreme Court decision like that. So that's good.
Mm-hmm.
That's good that people are interested in that. Usually I think of more political things, legislative or executive things. So that's good. So what was your experience about that since it was your first protest in person? Was it a good experience? I take it was?
it was a good experience in the fact that it helped me learn how few people understood what was going on.
Oh, okay.
You know, there was only maybe a dozen of us that were there.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that's, you know, I mean, obviously certain protests can take quite a lot of organization and time to organize. This was kind of like called upon that week that the McCutcheon decision came through. And
Okay.
it was a very quick, hey, show up. We've got some signs, you know, or you can make signs and, you know, show up because we want to know if this matters to you. And so, you know, that's why I showed up. And this is 2014, you know, and I believe, like, for myself, I think, and I was back and forth between North Idaho and Oregon at that time. I was in the process of moving from North Idaho to there. And my husband and I, we both have been, we've always kind of read a lot of the Supreme Court decisions because the
Oh, wow.
justices will write. They'll write about why or what case they're making, and then there'll usually be a dissenting argument from another justice if it was not a unanimous decision.
Sure.
And so we usually would read the dissenting, you know, argument as well. And so for us, yeah, well, you know, it's not something a lot of people understand to go watch, but right now there's big things on the docket. There has been big things on the docket for the last 10 years. And so it's kind of scary how many people do not know that they just need to go read what those decisions were and the dissenting arguments so that they can get an idea of what their perspectives are as Supreme Court justices. And you start to understand that at least for us, we've been able to see right through into the partisanship that exists in the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the United States.
Sure, and it's supposed to be nonpartisan, right?
Correct. It's supposed to be they're supposed to be, you know, they obviously will have their own, you know, perspectives, and they should know law and be able to cite that law, but that's why they have clerks and things like that to help them with those things. And I'll get to that in a moment because clerking is actually a very big influence in a lot of this stuff in the dissertations. But one of the bigger things that I think people don't understand about what's going on with the Supreme Court is that the partisanship that has existed almost since the beginning, because it's very difficult because we had multiple parties in the beginning. You know, we had different kinds of parties, and there was a lot of, you know, big swings in the parties' existences and things like that. And so justices were going in and they came from some point of view. And so it's a lot of trying to figure out what's their point of view, what's their angle, why do they come from this, what are their previous decisions, and why does this seem to not pass the sniff test as far as, you know, why this decision was made. And so, yeah, it's a pretty interesting thing. And I'm not a lawyer. Just let me say that. I'm not a law student. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a paralegal. I'm not anything other than a lay person.
So that goes to show that we lay people can understand the law to some degree at least, and we don't have to always defer to them. We can read it firsthand like you did, right?
That's right. And in fact, just a little historical thing about the Supreme Court justices. One of the longest serving Supreme Court justice, which was John Marshall, he wasn't a lawyer from Yale or Harvard, like a lot of these. If you actually go onto the Supreme Court website, you can find out which Supreme Court justices went to which university. And it's all Harvards and Yales, and I feel like there was like maybe one other that was different, but it's between Harvard and Yale. And so, but John Marshall, he did all of his legal training through a mail correspondence.
Wow.
And he was a lay person, and he became the longest serving, one of the most just of our justices. He understood like the Indian Removal Act, and he understood he actually challenged a lot of the presidents and things like that, even if the presidents weren't happy about it. But he actually was one of the best that our court has ever seen, and he started as a lay person.
Wow, that's good to know. Yeah, he's got a lot of history behind him. A lot of those important decisions he made, he was part of them.
Yeah, and those decisions, because he made those decisions when he did, some of those has really stood the test of time as far as being able to say this was a precedent, this was a decided thing, this was a precedent that was decided on. So there's stuff that stuff is in our history, and it has shaped public understanding. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, for our audience, for those of you who don't know, would you please tell us who the SCOTUS 5 are?
So, originally, when I began the SCOTUS 5, there was actually a one who's, well, now they're dead. But Scalia, Justice Scalia was, he was the original. One of the ones that I looked at the most because he was just so exceedingly corrupt. And so it goes like this. It's Clarence Thomas, Scalia, okay, and Roberts and Kennedy and Alito. So it was those 5. And we've already had some, retiring and things like that. But these were, some of these guys, they really were doing some pretty, sketchy stuff. And like Samuel Alito, he and his wife have their hands in the EPA and wanting to fight that because they're invested in oil. We have Clarence Thomas was taking major gifts. Let's call them gifts. It was not gifts. That's not gifts. The guy was given a billionaire lifestyle by a billionaire, who obviously was, had his ear. And this is pretty much it's pretty consistent as far as some of their decisions. They're really super transparent. When I think when I began the page, it was when Scalia was alive. Scalia had a lot to do with ALEC. Do you know what ALEC is?
No, please explain.
Okay, so ALEC, I'm going to pull up the organization. It's not doing I don't think it's doing as well, but it's the American Legislative Exchange Council.
Okay.
And so it's a nonprofit organization of conservative state legislators and private sector representatives who draft and share model legislation for distribution among state governments in the U.S. So I'm just reading that straight off what they say they are. These people have, if anybody and if any of your listeners decide to go check out what ALEC is, it's pretty bad. They have influenced quite a lot in making sure that money, is a major factor in all parts of our government. So some of these guys were being courted, especially like Thomas. He had been, and Scalia. Scalia, remember, specifically was involved with people from ALEC, and that's problematic. You know, anytime that we have super hyper partisan points of view courting our justices, that's disturbing, and it should be disturbing to everybody who's, you know, paying attention.
Sure.
So yeah, that's the reason why I started Impeach SCOTUS 5 was because I was first learning about Scalia and his involvement with ALEC. Funny enough, you know, we have, what's her name? Sorry, it's like totally, Amy Coney Barrett. She is one of the associate justices right now. She clerked for, that's going to get me back into clerking. She clerked for Scalia.
Oh.
And you'll actually, if anybody feels like learning more about who clerked for who, I would suggest that people go learn about who clerked for who. Clerking is a big deal. You rise through the ranks of, you know, being judges and you know, go out and you're learning how to do law and things like that. But clerking for a Supreme Court justice is a really big deal.
Oh, sure.
It's because it's the highest in the land. So, you know, you can't go any higher except to become a justice, as a clerk. And they make a lot of arguments for the justice, to make their arguments for the case that how they're going to rule. So that is kind of to me, it feels very inbred. You know, you basically have like and I know that's an opinion, but that's kind of what it comes through as, is that, you know, you scratch my back, I scratch yours, and, you know, through close proximity, what are you involved in? So if she was clerking for Scalia at the time when she was younger, she was also being courted, or she was having communications with somehow members of ALEC as well. And all of those influencers, that kind of travel in that orbit are also influencing, which was at the time a future justice. And so this is not, that is not nonpartisan. That is not, you know, that is not keeping in line or with the spirit of what they're supposed to do, which is to know the law, to interpret the law with the greatest sense of doing your best to uphold the Constitution. And so, and that includes the preamble, by the way.
Oh, okay.
So whenever people talk about the Constitution, they want to talk about the bills and they want to talk about, you know, like, oh, you know, the acts and all that stuff. But also the preamble is exceedingly important because it sets the tone for what we are trying to achieve. For anybody that reads it, they'll understand that that's the tone that gets set. So when you have justices who are working outside of the understanding of what the preamble is to the Constitution, and then also giving, you know, making decisions based on their own influences, be they nonpartisan or partisan, they are taking that in and they're making decisions that are about me, you, and everybody else around us.
Okay. So for the process for clerking, is it mostly the law students at the elite schools are the ones in the running for that, and thus it's like you call it inbred? So is it you have to go to the elite school to get a clerking job, and then they groom you as an elite student, or what is the process that one would get to if one wanted to clerk on the Supreme Court?
So how do they become clerks for the Supreme Court.
Yes.
So they have to have already clerked for a federal court.
Okay.
So Federal Court of Appeals, I think it is. But most likely they're the ones that will wind up in a clerkship. So, and it's not that, and it is about the elite of legal careers. So in academia and, so it's like the elite of, that's actually how it can be described as, it's the most, and they have they kind of have, they have moderate influence on the justices because they're making a lot of, they're having conversation with those justices. Those justices are basically, those clerks are like their sounding boards.
Okay.
So they kind of get a bird's eye view, really, very close understanding of being able to watch a justice make decisions, based on what they know. Usually the justice will say, go find me this, go look for this, go look for a precedent in this so that I can turn back and, I think that there's something here and I need you to go research that. And so that's what they do. As well as, they help them with their dockets and stuff. But yeah, it does become pretty inbred, because if you really think about it, it's kind of like, the Olympics. There's a lot of athletes in gymnastics, but only a certain very small percentage are going to make it to the Olympics.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And so it's like that with that track, as far as like if you're on the track to be into wanting to become a judge or something like that, that's kind of how you go through the ranks, and you're trying to get through, you're clerking, and then you become a judge, and then, if you're clerking for the Supreme Court, you basically get like, all the benefits of being a clerk, saying, look, they clerked for me, and here you go be a federal judge in this thing, and here you are, and you get to make decisions about people's lives, and, so you would hope that what it does is to help those clerks like grow, and maybe even look at the decisions, and even with a Supreme Court justice or not, but that they would look at those things and say, how does this benefit the American people, and how does it benefit the American people through the Constitution, through what we guarantee in the Constitution?
Okay, yeah.
This is the bigger aspect of this all. When it becomes, when the decisions are very clearly coming from a corporate ideation, or like when they're making decisions about the Hobby Lobby decision, when they're striking down abortion access and rights, when they're doing any of these things, these are huge things to have change in stated law. If they are going to have this stated law and then they're going to change them, big things like this, or make a real choice to stand on the side of a corporation, it's, even though a corporation isn't a person, so it becomes really problematic. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you had done an interview with some folks from Move to Amend.
Oh, yep, sure.
Okay, so I'm gonna give them a shout out because they have some amazing resources for people to actually look to see what the Supreme Court, how there have been so many things on the Supreme Court that have been decided, decisions that have been decided, since almost the beginning. They have a timeline on their website, and I really recommend people go to their website and look up under resources, and they'll find the timeline there, and they'll start seeing that it's not just Amy Barrett Coney, or Coney Barrett, sorry, I always get her mixed up. or Kavanaugh or Scalia or Roberts or Thomas. It is an aggregated problem. This is a problem that has been aggregating for over a century of poor decisions by Supreme Court justices and even lower courts and things like that, to make what we should be having as constitutional freedoms and that are constitutional rights that are kind of perceived as our freedoms. And one of the bigger issues is that when you look at that timeline, you'll start to see very quickly the encroachment of corporations and their ability to corrupt our courts. And it has been going on for a really long time. That SCOTUS 5, that's just the 5 at the time when I was saying, wanting to step up and say something. There's more. There's more than that now. We need to be watching very keenly. We need to be watching decisions coming through and where they're coming from and looking at who they are, who's in their orbit, who's in the orbit of these justices. They recently, I think it was in 2023, I feel like, they had, or maybe it was even this year, I couldn't remember if it was, anyway, they put a thing about code of conduct up. The Supreme Court did. To talk about impropriety, because we only have one Supreme Court justice that was impeached, not removed, but one that was impeached. And that takes quite a lot of work. It takes the Senate. You have to get the Senate involved, and the House and Congress has to be involved, and it was for impropriety. And impropriety, when you're looking at it, like if you go to their website, I'm not on it right now, but if you go to the Supreme Court Justice's website, you'll actually see that there is, I think you have to scroll down a little bit, and you'll see like a tiny little link kind of towards the bottom with amongst a list of others that says code of conduct. And it's like a PDF. So you have to it isn't just like on their website, emblazoned on their website. No, you have to download the PDF to read it. And it's things like that are not, it's like, why put it there? Why not have it be, front and center? If you're going to talk about the history of the Supreme Court, if you're going to have that be a tab, why not have, this very important piece about who and what pertains to you as a justice? You should be very transparent about that. And so it's, the ability, the access to our Supreme Court justices is not being watched. And it's the same as what we deal with in Congress. We don't have enough eyes on what's going on with the influence in our Congress, with the influence of our executive branch, with the influence in our, all three branches are having heavy influence by players who are really just in it for them and their shareholders or their pocketbook. It's not about what we are looking for as a result of our Constitution. It is not in spirit with what we need in our Constitution and how it affects us. And so it's a really big one.
So how do we change this? Because it's hard to change the Supreme Court stuff because they're usually the last say on a law, the highest law of the land that they interpret the laws. So it's from what I understand, it's very hard to undo Supreme Court precedents.
It is. It's very difficult. It takes you have to have people with scruples. People who have a strong sense of, integrity and right and wrong. And right now we do not have a lot of integrity on in our court. How do we fix that? I think it's going to be about putting the right people into positions who are becoming federal judges, people who are, when we have elections, I'm not trying to like lean too heavily into elections. I mean, it affects a lot. Elections affect everything. They really do, because it's down ballot stuff. Whenever we're all very familiar with the presidential elections.
Yeah.
But down ballot means when you have judges who are going and moving on and continuing to, they're starting in podunk little places, or maybe they're not. Maybe they're starting in a larger place. And we're not paying attention to what's going on in the courts, because we're all pulled in 5 million directions to pay attention to this, pay attention to that. But if each person was able to really inform themselves about the purpose of our justice, and I say that in air quotes, in our justice system, we would be astounded at the level of and the lack of real, what's the word? It's of good, of strong, I guess I'm trying to say, sorry, it's the words are, it's the ideas in my brain. I'm just trying to get it out. The idea that we would have a good, strong, and actually really, it's like when you can have active debate, but with civil discourse, when we can have civil discourse and actually have it be a part of, the stream of consciousness where people are talking about, what and how laws affect us. We're not having good discourse. If we were really looking for that, if we wanted good discourse about what's happening in the highest laws that affect us, if we aren't having an honest and civil discourse and by removing partisanship out of it, that's actually the worst part about it. Any kind of partisanship that gets in the way of this is actually just detracting from the very real problems that we have in the justice system. We have people who are not moving through the ranks that should be moving through the ranks in our justice system. We have judges who are basically just probably not even being noticed for doing the good that they're doing, and not able to move through. And you can't challenge crappy judges if you don't have people able to move through those ranks.
Oh, okay.
So it's not that there's rank and file ranks, but if you're not seeing enough diversity in your judges, you're not going to get good judges. And when I say diversity, I'm not talking in the same way that everybody else would look at it, like diversity and equity and inclusion. I'm not talking in that type of terms, although that is very important. That's why we've had extremely amazing, justices like Thurgood Marshall. And so, we have had some really amazing justices and judges. We've had people who there's actually, I think just in the last few years, we had the first Native American woman become a federal judge.
Oh, wow.
Which is a really big deal.
Yeah.
I know for some people they're like, oh, well, it's, that's identity politics. But the truth is that these laws do not always reflect the people that they're not represented. And if they're not represented, there's how can you make sure that you're having a diverse enough conversation? And so that discourse is missing that. And so that's why we have to have a different mix of people involved in all the judging, all the justice system, all the judges that you can think of. We need to be seeing that. We need to have people paying attention and talking about it, and not talking about just they're Republican, they're Democrat. We need to be looking at who's influencing them, and we need to be taking some kind of measure in the sense of like showing up when judges are making poor decisions.
Okay. So
I'm
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead. No, fine.
So should we, like with the legislator and with Congress and state legislators, there's, as much as we don't like the system, there are some regulations about what they can and cannot take and receive. So what do you think it should be the same for the judicial, or should they be further restrictions because of the nature of their position?
I would say that there shouldn't be any. We shouldn't have any real influence from corporations at all. That's actually not in line with and I'm really being pointed about corporations here, because that's really what's doing the most amount of damage and influence. And like I said, if you go on that Move to Amend website and you look at the timeline, I actually talked with David Cobb. He's with the Green Party. He ran for president.
Yeah.
Really smart guy. He's actually really awesome. He came and he came to the town, like close by over by Portland, and I went to go there to listen to him speak, and we were talking, and he really clued me into something really important. And that was that there was a time when corporations had to apply for their corporatehood, and then we would have those in our legislation, and we would they would have to have their charter, their corporate charter, reviewed by the government, and they would determine if you were doing enough good being a corporation for the goodwill of the American people. And if you were not, your charter was pulled. You were no longer allowed to be a corporation. That kind of thing today would never happen. We have a government that has allowed this stuff to, based on our growth and all of those things, obviously the world population has exploded, and therefore with it all forms of business. But that should be a very big tell to a person that there was at one time some kind of guiding idea about the way that the framers of the Constitution and the people who were in Congress at the time had a point of view about the way business would be done in the United States, and in accordance with the Constitution. There was no personhood for corporations at that time. They were simply a charter that was applied for, and the government said yes or no, or reviewed it later and said yes or no. You're either a public, you're good for the public and for the Constitution, or you're not. And they understood that. We have a big disconnect in there right now because that has been allowed to happen not too long after that was all formed. Corporations have been able to get really in there really quickly and start really, greasing the wheels and saying, hey, let me get in there and let me corrupt you. And they did all over and over again. The railroads did it, the timber barons, the cattle barons, everything. The cotton barons, they all did it. They all did it. They all got their fingers in the pot, and they all found ways to influence government, and that includes our Supreme Court justices, because there was massive pushes to keep expanding on the land, which prompted things like the Indian removal. So when they started removing people from their land, the indigenous people from the land, those are corporations that had a lot of push there too, because they wanted land. And and people wanted land, and so they would, it's just a horrible, it's part of the horrible history. However, we did have Supreme Court justices who were pushing back. And so, that existed. And we were really lucky to have had people who had the scruples, who had a conscience, and tried to hold other branches of the United States accountable for those things. And it was tough.
Oh, sure. So how would we review corporations at scale? Because I've done the process of incorporating organizations a couple times before in Texas, and you go onto the website and there's hundreds that are constantly being incorporated all the time, hundreds each month. So how would you be able to review each one at scale? Do you focus on the bigger ones that are able to make the contributions, or how do you do that on scale?
You mean for the purpose of corruption or anti-corruption?
Yes, to make sure they're not like you're talking about, they're not influencing the government in ways that we don't want them to influence.
Well, I think there's some people who really poo-poo the idea of watchdog coalition groups, but I do think that we need to have councils who are able to look at those, like they work in concert with the state governments.
Okay.
I think that if you had watchdog groups who could look at it and actually interview, like now it's so easy. A person can just go online, do their articles of incorporation, and pay a fee or whatever, and that's it. Like they're most likely rubber stamped. This is a sign of really, this is where bureaucracy can really tie us up and hurt us, because when you rubber stamp things, that means that's not well thought out. It's just, and then people go, oh, free enterprise and the market will blah, blah, blah this. But the truth is the market will decide, well, that's just not true. Because when it comes to a small business versus a large business, you take a mom and pop store and have a Walmart come into the town where the mom and pop store is, and mom and pop stores will fight that Walmart, and they will try to get all of their friends and rally around, but it depends on who's on your city councils, who's on your county councils, who's, you know what I mean? And they will be the ones that decide. And if there's just enough in it for them, they'll go against what the needs of the people are, or the needs of business are. So the free market decides. Free market doesn't decide. It's your council members, it's your congressional representation, it's your people on the Supreme Court, it's your president. These people are the people who are making decisions about free trade or free market will decide, because they have their friends. And when their friends have their back and they're like saying, hey, I'll give you money towards your next campaign, let me do that. Oh, I don't have any caps on how much I can spend. Oh, that's awesome. Now I can give, Hobby Lobby can give millions or thousands, and they can do whatever they want, and they can disperse it through their employees. That's a common tactic. And that's the truth. That's how you get these massive, they're not even really budgets, these massive money-making fundraising for candidacy. They're huge. I mean, why is there this much money when everybody's crying about, we have no money to give people, we have no money to help those who are really in need, like the small business owners or anything like that, but yet these politicians are able to get a whole bunch of money from corporations because the Supreme Court said it's cool. So how do we stop that? We start really informing ourselves. We start learning, and we start asking for the people around us to pay attention, and maybe enough of a groundswell of people will understand that this is really just hijacking our lives.
Oh, sure. Wow.
And I've worked in anti-corruption groups too, so I don't know if you've ever heard of Represent Us.
Yeah, I've heard of them, sure, yep.
Yep, so I was a member of a chapter in Southwest Washington, and we actually took what was called the I'm hoping I can grab it out of my brain here. It's the American Anti-Corruption Act. That's what it's called. And it's really simple. And we used to take this pledge to the state legislators who were our representatives in state houses and have them sign it. And we had because we were a nonpartisan group, we had bipartisan support. We had Republicans signing on with it as well as we had Democrats signing on with it.
Okay.
And they're small. They're not big senators going off to Washington D.C. They're just in our state houses. And so that's, the American Anti-Corruption Act is really well thought out. It's not very long. It's not even tough to understand. It's all written in a way that we can understand. Okay. And Represent Us understands like the amount of, they actually have had time to work with other groups like OpenSecrets.org where you can track the money. There's been, I think there was Hack Oregon. In Oregon, there was a group of not hackers, but they went and they got a bunch of information about where money was coming from and who it was going to. And so we call it's legalized bribery is really what it is. It's legalized bribery. And if we can't be honest about what it is, and if we were pussyfooting around the issue, and even when we're going to state houses and we're talking to legislators saying, hey, we don't want to see you who we voted for, whether we voted for you or not, but you've gotten into position of office to make some kind of impact in the lives of the people that you represent. We want you to know that we want somebody who's not going to be just rubber stamping something because it came from some corporation or from somebody who has clear partisan, sway or influence on you. We want you to be a thinking person and think about us, all of us, including yourself, in the decisions that you make for all of us, including yourself. I think that's the problem is that we get a lot of these folks who are just in it for themselves. And that's just that's not what government is supposed to be for. Government is by the people, for the people. And the people is a very broad term, but it means all of us. If you're going to disrespect one group of people because of your own perspective, then what are you doing here? You're not about the people, you're about your people. And that's not okay.
Yeah, you're right. Would it help if we elected the Supreme Court justices or they weren't on life terms? Would that help, or would it not get to the root of the problem?
Well, I don't think that it's entirely going to be able to get us to the root of the issue. I think that we have to have an oversight. Okay, so we have checks and balances, right?
Yeah.
That's what they're supposed to be. Those three branches are supposed to be each other's checks and balances. But what happens when everybody's, okay, so for instance, there are people who say that this is a Trump's bench. So this bench on the Supreme Court justices is supposed to be a Trump bench, right? And that's not okay to say. Like, do we hear ourselves? We should not be saying that. That is the people's bench. And 76 million people voted for Trump, but another 181 million adults in the United States did not.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's the numbers. That's the facts. People can go look it up. Trump doesn't have half the nation with support. He does not. Just like Harris didn't have half the nation. It's just who showed up to vote. That's it. That's all it tells you. And so, what we have is we need to have, when we have a Congress that's, walking lockstep with the president, when we have, and they are making decisions about our Supreme Court justices, this is scary. Okay? Yeah. I mean, the most important thing should be about is it's not about changing a bunch of laws. It's about guaranteeing that our Constitution works for everybody.
Yeah.
It's, I'm not talking about that's really what it comes down to. Like, if the appointment situation, and that's the way it's been, appointments this whole time, then I think term limits, that's always been talked about. And actually that is something that has been being higher in this conversation about Supreme Court justices. There was somebody, I feel like maybe Biden administration or somebody, I can't remember, it's not sticking anymore in my brain, but somebody started the conversation on a higher level in our government about term limits for our Supreme Court justices. I do think that this is a good idea.
Okay.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg was so infirm. She was not okay. It was very clear she was not okay. And there's also been a lot of hypocrisy from Congress, between Congress and the president. Even when Obama was he was on his last term, and there was an opening on the Supreme Court, and Congress came in and said, "Oh, you can't appoint anybody because you're in your lame duck term. You're on your lame duck stage. You're not allowed to appoint anybody." And that's just not true, because it's happened with Trump. So it's a both sides problem, when they're talking about out both sides of their mouth, and it's strictly hypocrisy. You actually can look it up and you can find out just what they did. And so this appointment thing and these weird rules that are not really rules about how appointment works, they just come through and they run over people. And I know that Obama was kind of trying to work on a bipartisan, that was what he did all 8 years of his presidency, is he spent a lot of time trying to bring the two parties together. And that was the mess. That was kind of the mess that came out of all of this with the Supreme Court and why it's all jacked up. Because he was trying to be, diplomatic with people who are not interested in diplomacy. So, and that has really hurt us. We should have been able to get other other justices in there. So, and when I say we, I'm like, we the people should have been able to have different justices go in instead of having Trump pick two who are really problematic and, and should have been looked at a lot harder. But, they really like to tie it all up in knots. So, but I would like to see, more people paying attention to those, decisions. It really does impact us. There's one right now about, gender affirming care for trans people. And, there's one about parents' rights and stuff like that, rights to their parents. For one of the school districts, there's like this parent coalition, and when I say coalition, meaning people who think that they know better than their child, knowing who they are. It's pretty messed up, and that's actually a decision is like that's like I think they already decided, or no, maybe it was like an appeal or something. But that one's a big one, and it's going to be a pretty big conversation because, well, it's been highly politicized instead of it being about people's rights to their own life. Children are not property. And it seems like, the Supreme Court might have a say at some point about whether children are property of their parents.
Wow.
So that's a big deal. We're talking about human beings.
Yes.
And their rights. And, so it is a bigger issue. But there's a lot of the money money in politics decisions that have, well, and let's be frank, that's been happening since the beginning. Money in politics, that's been a long road to hoe. And if you look on the Move to Amend's timeline, you'll look and you can see how those decisions affected just about everything. So especially when it came to corporatehood as personhood. But yeah, I don't know if you have any other questions for me, but hopefully I've explained quite a bit of where I come from and how I understand it.
Yeah, that's very informative. A lot of good stuff we talked about. So how can the audience support you and your mission there? You have the webpage that we can put in our show notes. Is there any other place they can go to support you?
I don't, the best way to support me is for people to go get informed. Okay. It's for people to go look at those resources. It's to go learn how to read a dissenting opinion from the Supreme Court. It's to know how to go read a decision about from the Supreme Court. It's to actually go look, go read, go learn, learn about John Marshall. Go learn about how as a layman what he did. Go learn about Thurgood. Go learn about Sandra Day O'Connor. Go learn about our Supreme Court justices. They really have done a lot in the way of our lives. There's so many people that have no idea why it's so important to have Elena Kagan. It's so important to have Sotomayor. Like if we didn't have some of those people on the Supreme Court, we would not hear good information. Their dissenting opinions are usually super sound. Okay. They're amazing, really. And I love Sotomayor. She's amazing. She's really a good justice. I feel like there's not enough people who know who she is and what she's talking about. They need to read what she writes. And my understanding is that when some of these justices are writing their opinions or their decisions and everything, that's the opportunity for you to hear from their own words and from their own minds how they really feel about our Constitution and how it affects us. So how people can support me is to go learn how to do those, how to learn how to listen and to read and to inform themselves so that they're not alone in the dark. They don't feel like they're going crazy reading these decisions. You know what I mean?
Oh, sure.
And as far as like the McCutcheon and Citizens United, there's a lot of people who want to get money out of politics, and I suggest going and supporting those people. Any type of actions that they're trying to do on a state level, to do it. It's really, really important. And anything anti-corruption that's real anti-corruption, nonpartisan based, do your homework, find out where they're coming from. I do like Represent Us. I feel like Represent Us has a good understanding. Sometimes you can have people kind of like, well, because it's nonpartisan, you'll have kind of a myriad number of people that'll kind of mix together. And sometimes you can go like, oh my gosh, that person was in the Bush administration. I'm anti-Bush, so why would I listen to this guy talking about anti-corruption? Well, it's really important actually. It's really important to actually listen and find out why they're talking about that, why they're talking about anti-corruption, why they're talking about lobbying. And lobbying, I guess let me leave you with this too. Lobbying, citizen lobbying is very different from corporate lobbying.
Oh, okay.
Citizen lobbying is a good thing. And that's why we need to be in our state houses. And one of the things when I was in state houses, when I was in like Washington state houses, like when I was in the, going to those meetings and such, one of the things that stuck out to me that was really kind of scary is that when you would go find your representative, and you could do that, as a citizen, you can go to your state house You can go, if you make an appointment, you can usually go see the representative that you voted into office, or maybe if you didn't, whatever. But one of the things that stood out to me, and I'm not sure if it's like this in other states too much, but I know it's like this in Oregon, and I know it's like this in Washington. There is a wing for the Democrats, and there's a wing for the Republicans. There's no wing for anybody else. and so that should be, and it's actually really kind of horrible if you think about it. Why are they separated? They should have to mingle with each other every time they come to do a session. They should have to be next door neighbors to each other. You know, there should be, you know, in I don't even know if it's like this in D.C. because I've never been in those halls, but Marjorie Taylor Greene should be neighbors to Alexandria Ocasio, right there. She should be right there. You know, they should be neighbors. They should have to see each other every day. They shouldn't, you know, if they're going to stare daggers at each other, so be it. But they should have to look each other in the eye. And the reason why is because it builds what a lot of other, like, I will mention Bernie Sanders because he's probably the best at it, but he's a statesman and he is a very diplomatic person. And he has good manners with each other, you know, with other people. And when you learn how to be seeing your neighbor who's right next door to you in a state house, in state legislation, it forces you to, eventually someday, you're going to look at that other human being and be like, oh, they're a human being just like me. Oh my gosh, they're having the same food I'm having. You know? You're going to be like, this is a human being, and maybe we shouldn't be using our parties like clubs and clubbing each other to death with them. Maybe we should have a conversation.
Sure.
And that right there will be how we help each other to understand how the Constitution is framed for all of us. And maybe that might actually spark something for when judges and justices change and things like that, is to start thinking about other people besides ourselves. And I think that's really what it comes down to.
There you go. Sounds great.
Awesome.
Thank you kindly for coming on the podcast today, Melanie. We appreciate it.
I really appreciate you too, and giving me an opportunity to speak with you and speak on this issue. It's a pretty big one, and I really hope that whoever is listening is able to go and research some of those things to see how it impacts them. Whether you agree with something or not is beside the point, because when you see how it affects you, you got to think about how it affects another person.
Yep.
And is it really in the spirit of the Constitution? Because we don't need to be post-constitutional. We need to be current with our Constitution, and it needs to help us all. But thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, we wish you all the best with your political endeavors and everything else you do in your personal and professional life.
Oh, well, thank you, and you too. And please let me know if there's anything I can clarify or help out with as a result of this talk with you.
Terrific. Thank you
Awesome.
so much, and have a great day.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.